Jimmy Valiant is 83 now, and a lot of people are wondering what he's been up to. His life has been anything but quiet, from infidelity to steroid use and a whole lot of wild drama in between. His story is packed with chaos. So let's jump right into it and take a closer look at everything that really went on. When you talk about old school wrestling characters who truly felt larger than life, Jimmy Valiant immediately comes to mind. He was loud, colorful, wild, and completely unpredictable in a way that made fans either love him or hate him with no middle ground. His career stretched across many territories and many eras, but one of the places where he became truly unforgettable was Memphis. The Memphis territory in the late 70s and early 80s was already known for chaos and drama. Then Jimmy Valiant arrived and added even more fuel to the fire. His feuds with Jerry Lawler and Bill Dundee are still talked about today because they were not just matches. They were emotional roller coasters that felt personal. Fans believed every word they said and every punch they threw. Jimmy and Lawler especially had some of the most intense arguments ever captured on wrestling television. One of their confrontations from 1978 in Memphis is still considered legendary. People compare it to some of the most famous arguments in modern wrestling because of how real it sounded. Jimmy Valiant had this way of talking that felt raw and emotional, almost like he was about to jump over the table and start swinging. Lawler matched that energy perfectly, and the two created moments that stuck in fans' memories for decades. Bill Dundee was another perfect rival for Valiant. Their matches often exploded into brawls that spilled outside the ring and into the crowd. It was common in Memphis for things to get a little crazy, but Jimmy pushed the boundary even further. There were stories of glass bottles being used during segments and of people in the crowd jumping to their feet because they had no idea if things were real or not. That was the magic of Jimmy Valiant. He made everything feel real even when everyone knew wrestling was a show. The man simply had a gift for turning ordinary rivalries into pure emotional drama. But Jimmy was not just famous for his wild feuds. He was also known for having one of the funniest and most creative gimmicks of the era. Every time the promotion would ban him or suspend him for bad behavior, he would mysteriously reappear under a new name. This time, he was Charlie Brown from out of town. The best part was that he did not even try to hide his identity. He kept the same huge beard, the same energy, and even the same voice. The mask barely covered his face, and everyone in the arena knew it was Jimmy Valiant. But the fans loved the joke. They happily played along and cheered for Charlie Brown as if he was a completely different person. It was silly and lighthearted, but it worked perfectly because it matched Jimmy's larger-than-life personality. This gimmick also showed how smart he was. Instead of disappearing during storylines, he found a way to keep working and keep entertaining the crowd. Charlie Brown from out of town became an inside joke between Valiant and the fans. It was a wink to the audience saying, "We all know what is happening, but let us have fun anyway." Wrestling back then was all about moments like this. People enjoyed being part of the story, and Valiant understood that better than most performers. As the years went on, Jimmy found big success in other territories too. His time in Jim Crockett Promotions turned him into a true superstar. There he became the Boogie Woogie Man, and his popularity went through the roof. He danced, he shook his long hair, he kissed fans on the cheek, and he brought a level of energy that was impossible to ignore. Every time his music played, the crowd would jump to their feet because they knew he was going to do something wild. He had a natural connection with the audience that very few wrestlers ever achieve. Part of it came from his charisma, but another part of it came from how real he always seemed. Jimmy Valiant was not a typical technical wrestler. He was all personality and emotion. He made the crowd feel something every time he walked out. His entrances were just as memorable as his matches. His promos were sometimes rambling, but in a way that felt honest and full of passion. You never knew what he was going to say, and that unpredictability became one of his biggest strengths. During his run in Crockett, he was part of several memorable storylines. His battles with Paul Jones and the Paul Jones Army lasted for years, and fans never got tired of it. The feud was dramatic, ridiculous, intense, and hilarious all at the same time. Jimmy fought off an entire group of heels while still dancing and smiling his way through the chaos. It became one of the longest-running storylines of that era, and it worked because Jimmy had such a bright personality that fans naturally rallied behind him. What made Jimmy special was that he never toned down who he was. He didn't try to fit into a mold or act like anyone else. He was pure entertainment from beginning to end. Even if someone had never watched wrestling before, they could look at Jimmy Valiant and instantly understand that he was a star. He just had that presence. As the years moved forward and wrestling began to change, Jimmy continued working across independent promotions and making appearances for fans. Even as he got older, he still kept the same flashy look, the same long beard, and the same lively spirit. People loved seeing him because he carried the energy of an era that many fans considered the golden age of wrestling. Jimmy also became a mentor and trainer for younger talent. He opened a wrestling camp where he helped new wrestlers learn the basics of footwork, timing, and crowd connection. Younger wrestlers often said that Jimmy taught them more about understanding an audience than anyone else. He would tell them that wrestling is not just about moves. It is about making the crowd feel something every single time you walk out. His passion for wrestling never faded. Even in his later years, he stayed active, signing autographs, making public appearances, and telling old stories that fans always loved hearing. Every time he appeared somewhere, he brought a wave of nostalgia with him because people remembered watching him during some of the wildest years in wrestling history. Jimmy Valiant's wrestling career was wild enough on its own, but his personal life and the choices he made outside the ring added even more layers to his story. For someone who lived as loudly and boldly as he did, it is no surprise that his life was full of controversy. Some of it he created himself, and some of it came from the lifestyle he lived as a traveling wrestler for decades. When you put the whole picture together, you get a man who entertained millions but also battled his own mistakes, regrets, and physical challenges along the way. One of the biggest and most talked about controversies in Jimmy Valiant's life was tied directly to his marriage. Fans from that era remember his wife, Big Mama, who was often part of his act. She accompanied him for entrances, kissed him, hugged him, and helped build the crazy fun image that made the Boogie Woogie Man so popular. But behind the bright colors and the high-energy entrances, their relationship was falling apart. Jimmy has openly talked about how his personal decisions helped cause that collapse. The real breaking point came when Jimmy had a child with another woman. This was not just a private issue. It deeply affected Big Mama, and their marriage eventually ended in divorce. For a wrestler who was in the spotlight and depended heavily on his personal image, this was a major personal and professional blow. The emotional weight of that breakup was something he carried for a long time. It also happened during a key moment in his career when many wrestlers were being recruited by the WWF. Fans later learned that one of the reasons Jimmy did not jump to the WWF during the booming '80s era was because he was dealing with the fallout of his divorce. Jimmy himself said that with everything happening in his life at that time, he simply could not bring himself to commit to a completely new environment, especially one as demanding and controlling as the WWF. He felt overwhelmed and unstable, and he admitted that his personal life played a major role in shaping the direction of his wrestling career. When you listen to him talk about those years, you can hear the regret in his voice. Not only did he lose his marriage, but he also missed out on a career opportunity that could have changed everything for him financially and professionally. But that was only one part of his struggles. Jimmy Valiant also became very open later in life about his steroid use during his wrestling days. Back in the '70s and '80s, steroids were extremely common in the wrestling world. Many wrestlers used them to stay big, strong, and physically impressive for the fans. The schedule was brutal with long drives, nightly matches, and almost no breaks. Wrestlers felt constant pressure to look powerful and larger than life, so many of them turned to steroids. Jimmy was one of them, and he has been honest about the fact that he used them. He has said in interviews that when he looks back at those years, he feels a lot of regret. At the time, he felt like it was just part of the business and something he needed to do to keep up. But later in life, he realized the damage it did to his health and how much he wishes he had taken better care of himself. His honesty about this topic has actually earned him respect. Instead of pretending he never made mistakes, he openly talks about them and warns young wrestlers not to repeat them. His physical decline in his later career was also noticeable, and fans commented on how different he looked compared to his prime years. His body changed significantly, and the muscle mass he once had slowly disappeared. This was not surprising. He had been wrestling for decades, and the mix of aging injuries and past steroid use took a real toll on him. There were times when he moved slower, looked tired, and simply did not have the same energy he once did. But one thing stayed the same. He always gave fans everything he had when he stepped into a ring, even if his body was not what it used to be. People forget how demanding the wrestling lifestyle is. Wrestlers are constantly on the road, living out of hotels, eating whatever they can find, and performing night after night. Jimmy did this for years, and it eventually caught up to him. He dealt with aches, pains, and the kind of long-term wear that never completely goes away. Even though he kept working as long as he could, his later matches were clearly harder for him physically. Another part of Jimmy's story that often gets overlooked is the emotional toll of living such a wild life. When you spend decades traveling nonstop, it is easy to fall into bad habits and make bad decisions. Jimmy has talked about how the lifestyle fed into his personal mistakes, especially the ones that broke apart his marriage. He admitted that being on the road constantly made it harder for him to stay grounded. He was surrounded by temptation and chaos, and he often gave in. Those choices stayed with him and affected the relationships he cared about most. Even with the regret and the physical struggles, Jimmy never stopped being a storyteller. In interviews, he sometimes talks about those controversies with sadness and sometimes with a sense of humor, but always with honesty. He knows he messed up many times and he accepts it. That honesty is something fans have grown to appreciate because it shows a different side of him, a more human side that was not part of the colorful woogie man persona. Despite all of this, Jimmy still found ways to give back to the wrestling world. Even as his body aged and his career slowed, he opened a training school where he mentored young wrestlers. His goal was to help them avoid the same mistakes he made. He taught them to take care of their bodies, to stay focused, and to understand the importance of personal responsibility. Many students said that Jimmy's life lessons were just as important as his wrestling lessons. In his later years, Jimmy has kept busy with autograph signings, fan conventions, and appearances where he tells stories from his long, unpredictable career. Fans love hearing about his wild days in Memphis, his backstage adventures, his regrets, and even his emotional lessons. The older he gets, the more reflective he becomes. He talks openly about the good, the bad, and everything in between. All right, that brings us to the end of today's video. Be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss anything new.